çarşamba günü yapılacak bir seçime sen Türkiye-Hollanda ilişkilerini feda ediyorsan bunun bedelini ödeyeceksin.
We will never negotiate under threats.
Bunlar Bosna Hersek'te Srebrenica katliamında 8.000'i aşkın Bosnalı Müslümanı katledenlerdir.
They are completely detached from reality.
In its dying days, the Ottoman Empire was called the sick man of Europe. Now, Turkey says the tables have turned and Europe itself is unwell, plagued by Islamophobia and even fascism. For Europe, those charges, most recently aimed at the Netherlands, are unfair. Is the rhetoric symptomatic of a relationship in crisis, or is there something more at play? The Netherlands has just returned the ruling centre-right party to power, seen as a victory over populism. Many believe the Prime Minister was helped at the ballot box by his firm response to Turkish political rallies, a response Turkey says violated international law. Next month, Turks face a vote of their own to decide on shifting from a parliamentary system to a presidential one. Will Ankara's tough language secure more yes votes? Our newsmaker today is the fractured Dutch-Turkish relationship, as we ask how it's being shaped and what it will take to repair it.
They're very nervous and cowardly. They're Nazi remnants. They are fascists.
This country was bombed during the Second World War by the Nazis. It's totally unacceptable to talk in this way.
It escalated quickly. A diplomatic spat between two NATO allies, trading insults, blocking politicians, and threatening payback. The fallout began on Saturday when Dutch authorities barred two Turkish ministers from addressing expats as part of their campaign for next month's constitutional referendum. The Dutch say they banned the rallies over fears it would stoke tensions before the country's parliamentary elections, which took place on Wednesday. But Turkey says the actions were biased political interference and that the rallies of the opposing campaign were allowed there. Turkish expats protested on the streets. Riot police used water cannon and dogs to disperse the crowd. Turkey has now suspended high-level consular ties, banned diplomatic flights from the Netherlands, and told the Dutch ambassador, who was out of the country, not to come back. It's also ramped up the rhetoric.
The Dutch are those who massacred over 8,000 Bosnian Muslims in Bosnia-Herzegovina in the Srebrenica massacre.
Dutch Prime Minister Mark Rutte says Turkey's actions are completely unacceptable.
Turkey is a proud country, but also the Netherlands is a proud country. We will never negotiate under threats.
Both sides have been accused of using the diplomatic tension to their own political advantage. Centre-right Prime Minister Rutte was at risk of losing Wednesday's election to far-right anti-Muslim candidate Geert Wilders. Rutte is accused of taking a hard line on Turkey to win over far-right supporters. And the tactic may have worked, with Rutte's party easily defeating Wilders. Turkey was in a similar spat with Germany last week over the cancellation of rallies there, with President Erdogan also accusing the German government of Nazi tactics. Next month, Turkish citizens vote on whether to change the constitution and move to a presidential republic. The ruling AK party says it's necessary for efficiency and stability, but critics say it will put too much power in one person's hands. And some see the ruling party's strong response to the Netherlands' actions as an attempt to drum up nationalistic feelings among Turkish expats, whose votes could be key in swaying the referendum result. Will the diplomatic dust between Turkey and the Netherlands now begin to settle, or will the situation continue to escalate with lasting consequences? Yvette McCullough, The Newsmakers.
To help unpack these issues, I'm joined now by Mehmet Solmaz in Brussels. He's the news editor of the pro-government Turkish newspaper Daily Sabah. And from Groningen in the Netherlands, Dr. Kees Arts. He's a professor of political institutions and behavior at the University of Groningen. Thanks both of you for joining us. Mehmet, Turkey says the Dutch breached the Vienna Convention and Turkey has now complained to the UN. Tell me how the Dutch have breached the Vienna Convention.
Well, the other day on Saturday, I was in Rotterdam And the things that I went through myself as a journalist are quite surprising, to be honest. Like some of the police aggression, I say, or the things that I had done were also captured on videos too. I mean, like in the video, you can see that I'm showing my press pass to the Dutch police who surrounded the Turkish Consulate General's building, just pushing me out with a baton in his hand and cornering me with on horse charges, and these are the things that Europe in general is claiming to fight for, struggling against things that are being done against journalists across the continent. However, I think what has been happening right now in Europe in the last few years is like, if you're bashing Turkey, you're free to do it. It doesn't matter if you're a journalist or a diplomat. That can be done in any way. And you can call yourself liberal, just like the liberal leader in the European Parliament, who had just, a few weeks ago, were in talks with the Eurosceptic and extreme rightist Italian group. He was trying to form an alliance with a extreme rightist group from Italy in order to have a seat, to have a leadership at the European Parliament. So, and looking at Holland, again we see another liberal leader, Rutte, a liberal prime minister, but we have all witnessed what he had done in the past week. But again, the issue is Turkey, so it's free to bash, I guess.
Okay, but so let me pose this to Kees Arts, because you've mentioned a lot of things here. First of all, do you see it as Turkey bashing from within the Netherlands? And secondly, could your government have handled the situation better? I'm talking from the very beginning with regards permission to police response. Could the Dutch have done better?
Could the Dutch have done better? Well,
yeah, they could.
Maybe, probably. I think we can all look back at what happened and then draw conclusions on perhaps smaller or bigger mistakes that have been made. But as far as I can see this, and you have to know that I'm not a diplomat and not an international law specialist. I'm a public opinion person, but as far as I can see this, this was an exchange between the governments of the two countries that started quite a while before the last Saturday, and which somehow took a course that ended in these, well, I think very unhappy and events that we are just looking at now. So yes, perhaps the course of action could have been different, but it takes two parties for this, and in international diplomacy, again, this means that the exchanges between the two governments should have taken another course too. And I don't know in big detail, probably just like you, what the detailed exchanges between the ministers and the diplomats have been.
There was Professor Arts, there was a claim that, okay, the Dutch decided not to let these rallies take place because of, quote, it being a risk to public order and security. But on the other hand, the Turks provided evidence that there were those campaigning for the no vote in the month before this, and so on. Yeah. So would you accept that there was a double standard at play here?
Well, if double standard, I'm not sure that that's the correct term here, but yes, we can see that this was part of the problem last week. It's not just the election in the Netherlands, which provided an unusual context, of course, for the Netherlands. It's towards the end of a national election campaign with all kinds of things that, well, you might want to avoid or not avoid in that time. I think it's also fair to say that in the Netherlands, generally, also at the government level, there is some concern about the proposals that are up for the referendum in Turkey. And I cannot exclude that this has also played a role here. Mm-hmm. If you would like to call this a double standard, well, that's quite a harsh term for it.
So let's ask Mehmet. Yeah. Mehmet, does that sort of hit the nail on the head there, that perhaps they're more okay with a no vote than they are with a yes vote because they don't like what the yes vote means, which means that perhaps they're going to be looking for any excuse to not have the yes rallies? Do you accept that as a Turkish citizen living in Europe?
Well, that's one of the reasons, I believe. And if you look at the surveys came out after last night's elections, Ipsos survey shows that 35% of those who voted for Prime Minister Rutte's party, they said the row with Turkey affected their decision. And this clearly shows that Prime Minister Rutte already made his mind up when Turkish Foreign Minister called him and said, you know, if you're uneasy with the extreme rightists, the anti-Islam wielders, you know, we could postpone our meetings to after the elections. And they refuted that, and I think they deliberately did that in order to gain, you know, 10 more seats. They have around 30 seats, as far as I believe. That's one of the reasons what I see. And in the Turkish constitution, in Turkish bylaws, if you want to stage a rally outside Turkey, it's prohibited if you're doing it outside, you know. However, if you're in a building, you're allowed to do it. That's according to the Turkish law. And obviously you have laws in Netherlands too. However, there is this diplomatic issue here. You know, it's a minister of Turkish Republic, a candidate country for the European Union. And all she wanted to do is not hold a rally or a meeting in one of the venues in Rotterdam, but all she wanted to do is visit a Turkish land, you know, we call it.
Right.
It's a diplomatic place.
So there was, sorry to interrupt you,
Mehmet.
Sorry to interrupt you. So you have this tremendous, you know, sense of disrespect and insult to the Turkish people, where you have this minister, she's the Minister for Family and Social Policy, Betül Sayankaya, who's barred from, you know, going to this rally, and she's asked politely and then maybe not so politely to leave and sort of forced out, right? And you have that, and you have the row erupting. But then in the aftermath, something that's a real sore point for the Dutch is that they were called Nazis and they were called fascists, and Srebrenica was brought up. Do you agree that maybe this was a case of playing the man and not the ball, and maybe this was regrettable?
Well, if we look at this Nazi rhetoric, I think the Turkish leadership is not directly saying, you know, Dutch are Nazis or Germans are Nazis because they're allowing a PKK or any other terrorist groups to stage campaigns in their countries, but ban Turkish ministers. It's not that they're calling them straight Nazis, but what they're trying to say is, I think, that's what I understand, this is what Jews were first going through, you know, when this hate campaign against Jews started in Europe, and Turks are facing similar stuff. I mean, like, as I'm based in Brussels for the past 5 months, I've seen many Turks, you know, saying because they speak out or they post things, their views on Facebook, they get sacked from their jobs. And if you're supporting Turkish leadership, which gets about 50% of the votes in Turkey, like twice as much bigger than the main opposition party, you know, you have to be silenced. You know, you're
so let's
about
ask
to lose your job.
Then. Kearsarge, does that interpretation sound reasonable to you? Does that reassure you?
No, not really, I have to say. I would like to make two comments here. First of all, I think, well, as you rightly pointed out, the reference to Nazism and fascism was really taken very badly here. It's you can say that this is part of a rhetoric, and perhaps you can even defend the kind of comparison. But still, I think that the Turkish Prime Minister also has perhaps underestimated how this would come over in the Netherlands. Secondly, the argument that about 50% is probably backing also the proposal for the referendum. I think, of course, this is an important fact that is relevant for politics, but at the same time, democracy, and that's what I think I would like to emphasize here. Democracy is about more than having a majority of the population behind your proposals. It's as much about protecting the rights of minorities. And I just want to emphasize that this is where the concerns on the Dutch side, as far as I know, are directed at. It's more the concerns about rights of minorities rather than putting into doubt that there is a huge backing also for the government in Turkey.
Okay. Mehmet, are we going to see the two countries kiss and make up, or is this going to be escalated?
The building that you see right behind me is the European Commission. And I asked them a question the other day, hoping that they would be telling some statements that would help both countries to sit on a table and mend ties, but it looks very, unhopeful. What I'm trying to say here is that, if the European Union and the European Commission especially said that, they denounce the fascism and Nazi remarks for Turkey, and at the same time they are condemning the Netherlands for their aggression on journalists and peaceful crowd and the diplomatic crisis on Turkish minister, I think that would have helped and calmed the situation. But looking from Europe, I think this the tension is going to probably stay at the same level for about next several months, or maybe after the French elections, it will get better.
Okay, Mehmet, this is where we thank you. Thanks so much for joining us. It's been a pleasure talking to you. Stay where you are, Professor. We're going to take a closer look now at the Dutch election and what the permutations of the Dutch election will say to us as things unfold. This is what Prime Minister Mark Rutte said after he won.
I think it means in the Netherlands that people have been responsive to two messages. In the first place, that we should not experiment, that we should continue the policies of recovery to make this economy stronger, and now to make people feel in their personal lives that this economy is one of the best performing economies in the Western world.
Okay, let's bring in Catherine de Vries now. She's a professor of politics in the Department of Government at the University of Essex, and she joins us from Colchester in the UK. Catherine, thanks so much for joining us. So, did the Dutch people choose a safe pair of hands here in a time of worry, Catherine?
Well, I think we could say partly yes and no. That's a diplomatic answer, but I think it's also a correct answer in this regard. So in one way, Geert Wilders was doing very well in the polls and did not really get the election result that he was anticipating, and he had for himself put the bar quite high. So that seems to suggest that they went more moderate. But on the other hand, Prime Minister Mark Rutte, but also the leader of the Christian Democratic Party, i.e. the other party on the right, used a lot of the same rhetoric that Geert Wilders put forward, i.e. being tough on immigrants. Also, we just talked, Kees Aerts and your other guest talked about the harsh line taken by the Dutch Prime Minister towards the Turkish diplomatic row. And I think those two elements don't necessarily would make us believe that that this is just moderation. I think part of Geert Wilders not doing that well is perhaps because other right-wing parties that took this kind of harsh line on immigration could reap the benefits of it.
Yeah, it's interesting. You've not seen the last of me, said Wilders, almost like a pantomime villain in many ways. Let's just bring up the actual results, because I want to talk through this a little bit. I know both of you can't see this, but I mean, looking at some of the details, it's fascinating because you have the Prime Minister's VVD with 33 seats, Wilders and his PVV with 20, the CDA 19, D66 19, the two left parties, the SP and the GroenLinks, or the Greens, 14 and 14, and then the others 3%, right? So I guess there are many ways to interpret this kiss. So on the one hand, people can say, oh my God, Wilders came second, Europe is lurching to the right, this is very scary. On the other hand, people can say, well, he only got, what, 12% of the vote. How do you interpret it?
First of all, I think the main interpretation is Wilders did not end up as the largest party, and Catherine de Vries has already made the important comment that this is partly because other parties are incorporating parts of his policies, his program, but nevertheless it's an important fact in the whole series of events starting last year with Brexit, then the election of Trump in the United States. Well, in the Netherlands, Wilders did not win enough. Very importantly, I think also is another fact that you just illustrated with the figure, and that's the extreme fragmentation of the Dutch parliament. You know that we have a very proportional system, so the percentage of the votes that the party gets directly translates into a percentage of the seats. And so far, fragmentation of parliament has been a problem, but not a major problem. I think we are now arriving at a stage where it may become a real problem, because it's so not evident before the election what will happen after the election. It's
right.
More or less a surprise what kind of government will be formed now.
Yeah, democracy is messy, right? So Catherine,
Yes.
if we can safely assume that the Prime Minister's party won't work with Wilders, who came second, does that make those smaller parties, particularly maybe those leftist parties, kingmakers of sorts when we look at how the government moves forward?
Yeah, so I just want to reiterate what Kees Arsjes said, that this is a very, very difficult election outcome. And I think also Mark Rutte, after first kind of being very celebratory, we do have to kind of also add here that he did lose votes. He didn't lose as many as predicted, and not as many as the other coalition partner, the Labour Party. But nonetheless, he didn't win this election. He's just the largest party. So the other parties that did win, which could then be those kind of contesters for a coalition, could be the CDA, so that's the Christian Democrats, D66, the centrist Liberals, and then Green Left, which is a party on the left. But then we're spanning almost the entire political spectrum in the Netherlands from left to right. And I'm not entirely sure that it's going to be, it's going to be very easy for Green Left, for example, leader Jesse Klaver, to agree with some of the, free market, quite strict immigration positions that Mark Rutte has taken. So I think it will be very, very difficult to form a coalition. One could think then that it wouldn't be a majority coalition, but a minority coalition, i.e. some parties working together with support from Parliament. But however, that was tried in 2010 with support actually of Geert Wilders from Parliament, and that didn't take very long. We had new snap elections 2 years later.
Right.
So I do think they will try to form a coalition, but they will need at least 4 parties to do so, spanning the entire ideological spectrum of the left-right politics in the Netherlands.
Yeah, making coalitions with people you don't like, it's going to be real hard work, I guess. Now, Kees Aerts, what does this tell us about where Europe is going? So the European Parliament was clearly relieved this morning.
Yes.
When they woke up to these results. What does this say about Europe, and what does this say about what's going to happen in France and what's going to happen in Germany, if anything?
Well, first of all, I think the message very clearly was yesterday that there is no Nexit coming up next. So the whole idea that perhaps the Netherlands would be the next country in the European Union to consider leaving the EU, that's completely off the table now. I think that's good news. It's because Europe needs some kind of a reassurance of this type. In addition, I think, this result in the Netherlands might also have a message for voters in France and later this year in Germany. With all the comments that we've already made and with all the perspectives that have already been put forward, in the end, the message is the populist revolt, which is currently going over the Western world, you could say. The populist revolt is not unavoidable, can be stopped. So in France, it's as possible as it has proven to be in the Netherlands,
right,
that the Front National will perhaps not win the presidency, and the same for the German elections later on. So I think it's an important signal to voters.
Okay, I want to get a final word from Catherine. We're completely out of time, so in less than 20 seconds, please. Do you agree that populism has slowed down in the Netherlands and perhaps it hit its peak and now it's slowing?
I think it's we should be very careful making sweeping statements about that. I think populism has been kind of a normal element of continental European politics since the early 1990s, maybe in the Netherlands a bit later in the early 2000s. And we've seen these parties kind of do well and then do less well and then come up again. And even these parties changing names, changing leaders. So I do think populism, or at least right-wing, far-right, anti-immigrant, anti-EU thinking will still be a force to reckon with in years to come.
Okay, it's been great to talk to both of you, Professor Kirst Aerts and Catherine de Vries, also Professor. Hope to have you on the program again in the not-too-distant future. Bye-bye.
Welcome.
That's all for this edition of the Newsmakers with me, Imran Garda. Thank you for watching. Bye-bye.